Ex-teachers and professors, what was your screw this moment? I caught a student cheating, but stupid cheating? Cheated off of someone else with the wrong answers and the same wrong spelling. When I spoke to him regarding taking a new test, generous on my part considering it should have been a 0 per school policy, he refused and said I would be hearing from his parents. I, of course, did hear from them via my principal within an hour. Gotta love kids and their phones readily available nowadays. Fast forward to a meeting with the students, parents, and principal. I had his test and the one from which he cheated. Upon showing this to the parents, I fully expected them to understand and hold their son accountable. Nope. Instead, the parents demanded an apology from me for branding their son a cheater, which would negatively impact him for the rest of his life. And also, it's the least I could do since they were paying my salary. When I said I would not apologize for catching their son cheating, the father then said I was lucky I was a woman because he otherwise would punch me in the face. Nice. So yeah, good times. Glad I got my master's degree for that. And that's what happens when you mess with the Malfoy family, I guess. Story 2. I caught a kid selling substances in the hallway and turned him in. He then threatened to end me. He was super unstable and volatile and had a criminal record, so I didn't doubt that he might try it. The principal refused to remove him from my class because he has a right to have an education. My other students took it upon themselves to escort me through the school and between classes and walk me to my car after school in a big huddle so the boy couldn't get to me. Screw that. Lots of people have asked why I didn't contact the police. I actually did. We had a PD station in the school, but nothing happened because the kid's mom was a cop and she pulled strings to have the whole thing quashed. I didn't file a union grievance because it was almost the end of the school year. That crap takes time, and I decided to quit and move far, far away instead. Also, to everyone telling me I shouldn't have ratted on the kid and snitches get stitches, I get it, you're edgy. But it was literally my job to help these kids become functioning adults, and selling substances in front of your teacher is definitely an indication that you're heading down the wrong path. I actually could have lost my job if I didn't report him. No regrets. Story 3. End of year assessing students to see who'd progressed through to the second year while assessing the work the department head came in and said we had to fail X amount due to facilities and resources for the next year. He then returned an hour later and said that due to the budget, we actually needed to pass a higher number than originally thought. I completely ignored what he'd said and carried on marking on merit, but it was the proverbial straw. This was a UK university a few years ago. The system has been really messed up in recent years. Story 4. I failed a college student who never came to class and missed both the midterm and final exams. The influential parents complained to the school. The administration later went into the digital records and changed the fail to a passing grade without my knowledge. I found out about it later, third hand. Ergo, I refused to sign a second-year contract they offered to me. Story 5. I had a student that copied off another kid during a test. I gave him 0%. The parents came in to complain to the administration that since I hadn't explicitly said during the first day orientation that cheating was not allowed, it was an unfair punishment. Administration forced me to allow him an opportunity to retake the test. He never retook the test, and the grade of 0 stood. Still, I was so disillusioned by the entire experience that I started looking the next day at college programs that I could use to transition away from public education. Yeah, proof that some that go into administration are wholly unfit. Like, it has to be explained that cheating is bad? Story 6. I was a high school teacher with 7 years experience in my district and a master's degree. I was making $49,000. This was 2013. I was talking to a friend who was in from out of town. This friend had barely made it through his bachelor's degree, even with a lot of help from me and other friends. Over dinner, he was complaining about not getting a good enough raise, so he was only making $143,000 at his software consulting job. He didn't even do the technical stuff, more customer relations. I left teaching to make more money. I am, but it has taken a while, and I really miss working with the kids. Wish I had stayed in teaching. Story 7. 2 weeks into my first year teaching 9th grade math, I had a girl attack another girl for no reason in my class. She was grabbing on her hair really tightly, and I was trying to break it up. Another student tried to help me out, and somehow the instigating student managed to punch him while still holding on to the other student's hair. Now, what makes this story relevant is I literally said the words, "screw this," while trying to break up the fight. Not loud, not to a student, but just like, "Screw this. I'm not going to let this happen in my class right now." Well, the instigating student decided to tell the principal that I was screaming at her. Despite the other students in the class supporting me and the fact that this student had a history of violence, I got a letter in my permanent file saying I had used inappropriate language towards a student. Screw that. Teaching taught me a lot, but I couldn't do it for more than a couple years. Really respect those that make it their career. Story 8. A female student I had disciplinary issues with accused me of making obscene gestures towards her. I'm an openly gay man, and most of the staff knew this, yet the district still put me on suspension while they investigated. They were able to prove she was lying, but the district decided that the best course of action was to transfer me to another school instead of, punishing the student. I quit at the end of the school year and got a job in banking. Story 9. I had a religion teacher in high school named Mr. Nguyen who was working on becoming a Jesuit priest and was a really cool guy. There was a kid in my class who was annoying, but Mr. Nguyen was always really patient with him until one day he pushed him too far. I forgot exactly what the kid said, but it definitely crossed a line. Mr. Nguyen slammed his fists on his desk and shouted, "Why can't you ever shut the heck up?" He then picked up his stapler and chucked it at the kid, missing his head by a few inches and leaving a huge dent in the wall, and then stormed out into the hallway. There was another religion teacher down the hall who heard the commotion and talked to Mr. Nguyen in the hall for a while to calm down. He didn't give up on teaching, but it was a pretty extreme screw this moment that I witnessed. Story 10. Mine wasn't so much a bad screw this moment. I used to teach developmentally delayed kids, and it was awesome. The one moment that sticks out the most was when we were doing a lesson on dinosaurs. I don't remember exactly what it was about, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, the kids were having a blast pretending to be dinosaurs, so we just said screw the lesson and had dinosaur day. Pretty much the whole day was spent acting like dinosaurs and doing dinosaur-y things. Story 11. I was invited to apply for another job. There is this feeling among professors that, though our jobs feel insufferably exhausting and stressful sometimes, that it is the best possible job anyone could have, and we should be nothing but thankful that we have them. I guess that's what keeps us going through all the BS. Recently, someone invited me to apply for a directorship at another institution, meaning I would move up several ranks and direct a research program and facility. When I was being told about the job, I was like, hold on, let me get this straight. I never have to teach again. All my research will be done with and by a large team of enthusiastic, well-paid trade professionals rather than itinerant, underpaid grad students and postdocs that I have to recruit and train every year. I never have to write another grant, and you will pay me twice as much as I make now? This completely broke the spell. I realized that being a professor, on balance, is actually a horrible job in a lot of ways. I think it is just so hard to get a job in academia. We brainwash ourselves that it is the best thing ever to go through this whole long, humiliating process. We know about these other jobs, but the buzz is that you are paid well and highly respected. But in turn, you sell your intellectual soul, so you should never want them. But it's just not true. There are some great jobs out there where you can still be a scholar, an even more productive and effective one in many cases, and not have to deal with the other crap. Story 12. I was a student teacher, had my degree, got my license. My heart wasn't in it after student teaching. It wasn't the kids. I mean, you just have to realize they're teenage idiots. I had 11th graders. It was the parents and the administration, the parents who refuse to raise their own kids, and the administration that doesn't back you up and hold you accountable for borderline unteachable kids. I remember two particular issues. First, quote, all inclusion. It's the newish movement away from special ed and toward having everyone in the same classroom. All kids don't belong in the same classroom because, Jesus Christ, some kids are brilliant at school and some aren't. It isn't their fault, it's reality. I had one girl who busted her back in my class and couldn't manage better than a 60 average. I had to give her a curve due to the effort or fail her. She didn't deserve that. She needed to be in a lower level class. I had two kids who barely had a command of the English language. One was a girl who was brilliant. She was originally from North Korea, would have loved the backstory, but again, didn't communicate well and just couldn't cope. It's one thing to speak English well, it's another to understand nuances and so forth. History is a pain to teach when someone's not proficient in English. Poor girl was pulling down hundreds on tests and calculus and D's in my class. And I had another kid who somehow ended up here from French Guiana in South America. Apparently, it took them a while just to figure out what language he even spoke before deciding he could hack a college prep history class. Turned out about as well as you'd expect. Secondly, the aforementioned parents. There's a growing entitlement from parents that I don't understand. They don't get why their kids can't pass or get A's. I don't know, show interests outside of the day report cards come out. You only hear from these parents several times a year and only to explain that little Billy barely turned in crap and failed several tests, despite the fact that this is all online and readily accessible. My final straw was probably the parent who said point blank to myself and my mentor teacher that we were doing a terrible job raising her daughter. The administration follows up on these things to determine resolutions and doesn't listen to reason because there always has to be a scapegoat that isn't them. I was pretty half-hearted about the whole endeavor after that. Did 2 interviews, got a couple of callbacks, said screw it, and went into banking. Story 13. I was teaching middle school English while overseas in Europe when 2 students, a boy and a girl, began fighting after the boy made comments about the girl's mother. For most people, this would be easy to break up, but as a 5'5" manlet, both the 13-year-old kids had several inches and pounds on me. When I positioned myself in between them, they took a break from fighting each other to work as a team to push me over a desk. They then promptly resumed punching each other's lights out. I quit that week. Story 14. Was substituting at a low-income middle school for the day, about 40 students per class. Just had a simple worksheet for them to work on every hour rotation. Spent the day breaking up fistfights, chairs or desks being thrown across the room, students having screaming matches, students climbing and dancing on desks, students just leaving class during the chaos. I had 6 students turn in the completed worksheet for an entire day of class rotations. I realized I was no longer a teacher but a prison guard with less benefits and no way to defend myself. I guarantee 80% of these kids will end up in prison before the age of 25. Never again. Story 15. When the principal told me one of my students' mothers was getting her secondary education certification so she could move up to teach high school math, where her son was, so they wouldn't be renewing my contract to teach the following year. But they were in need of a network administrator for the school district, and they were willing to pay me a teacher's $25K salary to do it, and I would be answering to each building principal like a janitor, not to the superintendent like a district-level admin. Story 16. Told this story 100 times already, but it was a time I was breaking up a fight between a 12-year-old boy and girl, and the boy turned around and punched me in the jewels as hard as he could. The school administrators did nothing. His mom was in the room with him. She did nothing. The general feeling was, this kid's mom pays tuition, deal with it. I dealt with it by leaving the school, opening my own private school, and taking half the students with me. Story 17. I told this story last year, so you may have heard it. I was subbing for a class that integrated some of the special education students for 2 hours a day. We were having a holiday party, so the kids got to push their desks together and have snacks and watch a movie. I'm sitting at the desk grading papers when I hear the class getting kind of noisy. I ask what's going on, and someone mentions that Trevor doesn't like this part of the movie. Trevor is a 12-year-old boy on the autism spectrum. He's a very large boy, about 6 feet tall and well over 200 pounds. I tell Trevor to come on over to my desk, and he does. He says he doesn't like when people sing in movies and starts covering his ears. I tell him I will fast forward this part, and he flips his mind. Apparently, he hates fast forwarding more than he hates singing in movies. He picks up a desk and whips it against a wall near a set of windows, flips over every desk he can get his hand on while screaming like someone is attacking him. He's just trashing the room and starts going after the kids. I yell for one of the kids to run and get his main teacher and another to get the principal. Trevor pushes a few kids hard enough to make them fall down, and he has a look on his face of a madman. I get over there and am able to pry his hands off with the help of a few students. Trevor then turns to me and in a deep, crazy voice says, "I'll find your house and hide under your bed until you come home." His teacher came in and was able to pull him away, and Trevor just stared at me the entire way out, laughing like crazy. It was scary as hell. Story 18. I have 2. Early in my career, I had students who were plagiarizing lab reports. I turned them in, mostly because I felt I had to. The school made a huge deal about cheating and had an academic honesty pledge statement students wrote on every test. One set of parents screamed at me over the phone. Next thing I know, I had a meeting with the vice principal who said they didn't want the cheating to interfere with the students' future, and he ripped up all the plagiarism reports I wrote that year. My second time saying, screw this, was based on the cumulative effects of being unsupported by the school. They changed which courses I was teaching and the grade level. We had a construction project going on, so there was a constant noise, including beeping and drilling. Even when they promised it wouldn't be during the school day, that was a lie. Stupid school-wide initiatives, more pointless meetings, incompetent higher-ups. It's the adults in the system that make it hard to be a teacher. The kids are generally not the problem. Story 19. I left during the first month of spring semester at a poor rural high school. It was my first year teaching, and I went from professional life to teaching through a state program. Absolutely no support from the administration. One class had over 30 students, another had half the class as troublemakers who would not calm down. At a bomb threat, a weapon found on a kid, a student passing away, and a teacher fired for an inappropriate relationship all before Thanksgiving break. A quarter of the teaching staff was new, 2 people in my department had already left, several teachers had already quit, and the interim principal and administration were refusing to help teachers with anything and actually blamed us. I'm trying to hang on, I'm hating every day of my life, and I'm thinking that all I need to do is make it through 1 year and I can do something else. Then in early February, the principal calls me in and tells me that he thinks I'm not a good fit, and that at the end of the year, I will need to go to another school or I will be terminated. In the real world, you don't tell someone you're fired, but stay on for a few more months and then expect them to stick around. I was out of there and thankful for it, although it hurt to abandon my fellow teachers and the students. Also, I had won Teacher of the Month during the fall semester, so I couldn't have been that bad. They'd done this because I refused to fill out a slip of paper indicating if I would be staying on for next year. Story 20. The exact moment I decided that I wanted nothing to do with teaching anymore was when I was teaching a summer college class in differential equations while I was in graduate school. Most students are pretty checked out of mathematics by that point in their academic career, and summer classes were the worst for students. The day before each test, we would go over topics and example problems that might be on the test. I told them that the questions on the test would be very similar to each and every example that I was giving. I actually gave them every problem on the test verbatim in that class. The students were also allowed an entire sheet of paper to use on the test. The average was 55 out of 100. I gave them the answers to the test and practically told them so, and the average was still a failing grade? Screw teaching these ungrateful idiots. Story 21. I worked at an elementary school as a paraprofessional. We had a 9-year-old psychopath. The day he was kicked out and pulled out by mom was the best day of that year. The whole year in general sucked. We had 13 kids and only 2 head teachers plus 2 paras, including myself. We had that psycho kid to deal with as well as several other highly behavioral kids. We had one of the head teachers leave on maternity and leave no plans. The other para quit unexpectedly. I was so stressed that I was losing weight and my hair. I was experiencing other health problems with my monthly cycle to the point that I almost passed out. When my husband's grandmother passed away, I was given grief about asking for a day off for her funeral. We hired another para 3 months after the first one left. We had subs filling in, and she was just awful. Everything that went wrong, I was blamed for. A kid threw a book at my back and caused a bruise. And by the end of April, I turned in my 2-week notice. I felt no guilt. And if you're learning a thing or two from this video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 22. Still a teacher here, but very nearly left the profession. During my EPD, early professional development year, which here in Northern Ireland is your first year of teaching, I was hired by a school with a really rough reputation. Started in September and was given some of the toughest classes in the school, which I thought was a valuable learning experience even though it was really difficult. Principal called me into her office in November to tell me that she thought I was a terrible teacher and that she regretted ever hiring me. Direct quotes from her. Was given no constructive feedback or advice and was thrown back into the classroom for the rest of the day. I had no choice but to stay there as teaching jobs here are so few and far between. But this situation repeated itself in March with her then telling me that I'd never be a good teacher and that I'd be doing the education system a favor if I quit and went back to working in the shop where I used to work. She also told me that she had advertised my position and replaced me for the following school year without my prior knowledge. Then avoided her until June when my classes sat their exams. GCSE class got 100% A to -C. Other classes did remarkably well. She had the nerve to offer me a reference on my last day, so I told her she could shove it up her back. In another school now and so much happier, have support of an amazing principal who regularly checks in and is impressed with the work I'm doing with my classes. Glad I stuck with it. Story 23. At a teaching license, was working as a tutor and helping out in a classroom where several of the kids were openly playing on their cell phones. After class the first day, I asked the teacher how she would like me to help handle this problem. She shrugged and told me that she didn't do anything about it because we need to pick our battles. That was the day I decided that education just wasn't going to work for me long term. Story 24. I work and teach in higher ed. I still teach online and had a student a few semesters ago who did hardly any work but asked for an exemption from all the work she didn't do. I had to reply and confirm she was asking to get a passing grade for doing no work because I thought I was just reading it wrong. There's an amazing amount of student entitlement that I didn't see 10 years ago, sort of like I pay for a passing grade in this course instead of I pay for access to college-level content. I think all the really great free resources online have changed the way they look at learning, and we haven't kept up. A bit off topic, but I've recently been spending time at my kid's elementary school setting him up with an IEP. Just working with the staff and watching how fast-paced it is really surprised me. I'd be in a meeting and suddenly a walkie would go off and they'd have to go out and handle a student issue and then come back to me, and that switching gears process is nonstop. And this might just be because I live in a relatively small town, but it seems like every teacher and staff member knows every kid's name and really seems to care. After spending years working with doctors trying to help my kid, it's the people at his school who have dramatically changed his and our life in just a few months. I know I couldn't do the work they do, and we will be forever indebted to them for their intervention. Story 25. Second year teaching, my principal, first year in this role, age 30, and I had a disagreement about me using a microphone that the district supposedly spent a lot of money on. I taught art, it only got in the way. He didn't agree with my assessment and told me if I didn't use it, he would hold me insubordinate. So I used it. He then spent the rest of the year coming into my classroom to observe me at least once a week and would look for reasons to write me up. He once wrote me up for my lesson plans not being on the desk he expected them to be on when he walked in. In March, he informed me that I would not be rehired and I didn't see him in my classroom again for the rest of the school year. I swore off the entire profession after that. I'm much happier as a nurse at a plasma clinic. Story 26. My wife is a teacher. She started in the UK public sector but left after 8 years. After a few months' break, she went into private education. There wasn't any one thing that led her to quit. It was working in a system that, over 8 years, saw 3 curriculum changes, 2 exam changes, and 3 changes to the inspection process. A system that demanded more and more from the staff while cutting funding and freezing pay, where she'd get to work at 7 a.m. and leave at 6 p.m. to do some work at home and spend almost every Sunday marking or planning or both just to keep afloat. A system that was constantly narrowing its scope and becoming ever more inflexible to the detriment of the children she was teaching, where her choice was either to teach her students to pass the exam but deprive them of useful mathematical knowledge and critical thinking skills, or to teach them these skills but run the risk of them doing poorly in their exams. This would jeopardize not only these kids but future pupils as well, because poor exam results would bring the school's rating down, leaving it open to being taken over by an academy chain, which would be even worse. It was a system that took an enthusiastic and excellent teacher, ground her down, and stretched her so thin, she basically had a breakdown and almost left teaching forever. Story 27. I was an adjunct at the bottom of the totem pole and got my class assignments last and only if the more senior people, everyone else, had gotten their minimum number of classes. They'd hold off on this until the literal last minute, and I'd find out if I was teaching 3 days before the semester started. For the last 2 or 3 years, I was only teaching online and only in the summer. During that time, I moved away and started a business, so it was all fine with me. Last summer, I got 2 classes I'd never taught before with about a month before they started. I had to learn a totally new subject for one and remember stuff I hadn't looked at since grad school for the other. They almost took 1 class away from me after I'd busted my back to prepare for it because nobody else's classes were filling up. The other class had 6 people in it. I was told I could teach it prorated for 6/11ths of the usual rate, and I refused. I didn't have time to learn that stuff, teach 2 classes, and keep my business going. Story 28. During my student teaching, I was at parent-teacher conferences. I was speaking to a parent whose son was failing, mostly because he did none of his homework. She was angry with me and pretty much told me it was my fault. She asked me why I wasn't making sure he did his homework. I said, it is homework, meaning work you do at home. It is your responsibility to help him and make sure he does it. She complained about me to the teacher I was student teaching for. He warned me that teaching is very political and that parents can keep you from getting tenure or get you fired. Other teachers told me that this was the climate nowadays. Children are not held accountable and parents blame you for their lack of parenting skills. I decided that it was not worth it to finish the teaching program, so I finished early with a degree in history and political science. The subjects I would have taught, history and social sciences, RX. My degree is pretty much useless, but I still make more than a teacher does. Story 29. My wife got contacted about applying for a job out of state. I encouraged her to do so. My thoughts were, I have a year and a half of teaching experience and a master's degree in teaching from an R1 research institution. This will be easy. It was not easy. I was told I could not teach in the subject that I was fully certified and held a degree in my current state, despite reading stories about shortages and emergency certifications in my field, but I could probably make it work in another field if I took 6 to 7 classes. I now work another job that I don't really like, though I can get those 6 to 7 classes for mostly free if I want them. The problem is starting over as a teacher again would be a decent-sized pay cut, and trying to convince myself to deal with the overall low societal respect for teachers is tough when the whole process has just exasperated my depression for 3 years. Story 30. I started teaching in 2008 when everything went to hell. I skipped student teaching and I was hired as an intern, got fabulous reviews, was loved by the kids and the admin, and found out mid-March I was being laid off with about 150 other teachers in the district. Got rehired 2 weeks into the next school year, even though they knew about the position for the entire summer at a different school. Did great there, got their computer-based instruction class up and running while still teaching English, and got laid off that March. It broke my heart, and they once again offered me another different school that was an absolute hellhole. I left and worked other jobs for years, moved around, enjoyed my 20s, met my now husband, and came back to teaching. My old district happily hired me again and promptly laid me off again, then hired me on a temporary contract, which was illegal. But my union was so worried about getting raises that year, they didn't care or help. Finally got tenure in that district and ended up getting a job offer at a much better district and left. I've been teaching for 7 years, and only one of those years I didn't have to completely take down my classroom at the end of the school year. Luckily, my new district does everything it can to not have to lay off, and I just got my tenure. Story 31. For me, I quit because I was stuck teaching kids stuff like the various parts of a plant cell or the concept of trigonometry, and many of them couldn't do things like tie their shoelaces, tell the time on a clock, work with other people as a team. These were 14-year-old kids with no life skills at all, and I was being asked to teach them things which would be completely meaningless to them instead of anything they might actually learn from. I know that some of these kids need to learn the higher level stuff, science type stuff, etc., but I genuinely believe that for many kids, school is just not the answer. I've done a load of other youth work type stuff, and they can learn so much more by doing a project or something than they ever will in school. It made me so sad I had to leave education altogether. Story 32. I was in college to become a teacher for all of a single semester. I volunteered to tutor local high school students since everyone in the School of Education seemed to be of the opinion that it's a good idea to get actual teaching experience as soon as possible, and boy, were they right. The first day I go in, I'm paired up with a middle schooler who needs algebra help. 3 times x minus 7 equals 27, solve for x kind of stuff, pretty basic. So I start explaining how you can treat both sides of an equation as expressions of a single number, which means that you can perform operations on both sides without invalidating the inequality, and he just stares at me saying nothing. So I kind of started working through a problem for him. Given the equation above, I would have said we could divide both sides by 3, but he didn't even seem to understand that. So at that point, I'm trying to work through division with this kid, but he didn't even seem to remember how long division works. The hour goes by, and we haven't even begun to solve a single problem before he puts his stuff away and leaves. It was at this point I realized I didn't have the patience to teach the kids who either don't want to learn or have fallen so far behind that they lack the fundamentals necessary to handle their current material. I understand that some kids have tough home lives and learning disabilities and such, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating to communicate with someone who just won't or can't try to learn. Story 33. Might be inevitable, screw this, in a week. I work with emotional/behavioral SPED kids in an elementary school. My one-to-one kid and I have grown a bond since I work with him for the whole school day, 5 days a week. We had a lockdown drill and he was hyperventilating and crying in the classroom in the minutes leading up to the announcement of the drill. The weight of the inevitable was just eating away at him. I spent nearly 45 minutes calming him down and keeping him quiet. Enter Jay, a real 4th grade schmuck. Pesters other students, talks back to teachers, is rude to everyone. His parents think he is an angel of a child and never discipline and blame the school. Well, Jay sees my student crying, walks right up to his face, and makes a crying boo-hoo face to mock him. Instinctively, I grabbed Jay by the sweater, pulled him into my face, and in the most stern voice told him to knock it off and get back to his seat. My student has a lot of anxiety issues, and seeing this student attack made me snap. So now I have a meeting with the superintendent, SPED director, and God knows who else. Meanwhile, Jay continues to go unpunished and pretty sure his parents will get me fired. Parents ruin the whole teaching career. Story 34. I had a senior finish the semester with a 40-something average and about 60% attendance. He was going to fail his senior year. On the day I was to submit grades, the administration came to me with the student and asked what he can do to pass. I said, take the class again. Well, that was the wrong answer, apparently. I was forced to give him a few makeup assignments and a 70 to pass. He was such a troublemaker, they just wanted him out. Found out 3 other teachers had similar experiences with this student. Story 35. I was a university tutor for 3 years and I quit after tutoring a section of Econ 101. There were 2 types of students I would get: smart students who wanted the extra practice and attention that the lecture hall couldn't provide, and those students whose parents made them go after they failed after their first test. I got a section of 4 students, one of whom fit the bill of having failed the first exam. He showed up maybe twice the whole semester to the tutoring sessions and then gave me a poor review at the end of the semester. I was donezo after that kid. Story 36. Taught for 6 years in low-income schools and a nice public school. Every day and in almost every class, I had to use Jedi mind tricks to redirect and confront blatantly disrespectful students. It was difficult to balance modeling appropriate responses to disrespect, but also being the alpha male adult in the classroom. I felt like my job was becoming more and more about managing behavior and keeping track of records than it was about teaching, learning, and those aha moments kids get. I was a really effective teacher, had good evaluations, and good at behavior management, but still, nah, for me. My moment was realizing I was somewhat wound up before every class, every day, not knowing what to expect, and that I was not giving my best time and energy to my family at home as a result. All of my energy was being spent on the kids. Also, it's becoming increasingly respectable to be blatantly disrespectful to others. Ironically, the same students are the most incapable to handle disrespect from others and the easiest to offend. Beyond the four walls of the classroom and into real life, they get themselves beat. Yeah, they say teaching is a rewarding profession. Apparently, rewards don't come in the form of sleep or sanity. Story 37. Got to watch one in middle school. I went to a really, really crappy school system where elementary high school was just one long hallway with two gyms and graduating classes averaged 40. My science teacher in fifth grade was a devout evangelist pianist, skipped the evolution section, and was actively racist to the few brown and black kids in my class. One day, I guess we just got too loud and rowdy, or maybe the whole class before, because he put in the sound of music and laid at the back of the room next to his desk on the floor. He cried quietly the whole hour. He quit and tunes pianos and preaches now. Screw him, by the way. My middle school also had a kid push over a 78-year-old substitute and break her hip. She quit, obviously, and teased their obese ex-principal, who had come back to substitute following leaving the school to take care of his cancer-afflicted wife until he left permanently. Story 38. I'm a teacher in New York City, one of the better states and large cities to be a teacher in. My salary isn't glamorous, but it is livable. If I worked a normal 40-hour work week, I would make about $40 an hour. But I'm expected to be at school, teaching, or somehow managing groups of children for 9.5 hours a day, and on average, I spend another 15 hours each week lesson planning or grading. Even putting in 65 hours a week, and I know some who work a lot more, the job is designed to be impossible. Hear me out. Here in the United States, those that make educational laws are absolutely terrified of a meritocracy. They do not want most children to receive a quality education. So they give you an impossible number of children to teach and an impossible amount of curriculum to cover. Instead of working to make class sizes smaller, they demand that you spend your own time and money earning more and more degrees. The kids can feel that something is wrong, that they're being denied access to a good education, but they don't know how or where to focus that energy, and so they, and often their families, blame the teachers and take it out on us. Today is actually my last day of teaching. I gave it my best for 6 years, and I just don't have another week in me. Honestly, I don't think my skill set is really geared towards teaching, but I've spent enough Saturdays writing lesson plans only to get called a witch for trying to implement them. I wanted to be better, but I just can't anymore. Story 39. I'm not a teacher or professor, but this is one of my favorite stories about a college professor. I was in his philosophy class. Cool dude. So we all show up for the final exam and he's very late. He rolls in, sticking to booze, probably in the clothes he wore the day before, looking like he just left the bar. It was an 8 or 10 a.m. final. He tells us this. So this quarter I've been trying to buy a bar in other city and managed to get it, but my wife didn't want me to. Last night, I was at the bar a little longer than I thought it would be, and when I got home, my wife had left me. So I didn't have time to make your final exam. Everyone gets an A, and screw this. He takes off his wedding ring, throws it in the trash, and stalks out of the classroom. One kid picked up the ring and I think tried to find the guy to give it back to him while the rest of us sat there, stunned. Sure enough, when the grades came out, we all got A's. Story 40. I was a bad teacher. I didn't have the organization and perhaps social skills to be successful. One day after my coworker, who had no respect for me, came up with a scheme that I turned one uncontrollable class, for me anyway, into 2.5, I was trying to get through a half day. I'd been thrown off my rhythm enough to where I wasn't completely sure what to go over, so I made up a lesson plan that day that I thought I could get through. During this time, the school noticed how incompetent I had become and had 2 supervisors in the room watching me. Earlier in the week, one had been very active in helping me to get control over the class, but today, she and another supervisor were doing nothing but taking notes. It might have been because I got in a ton of trouble the day before for doing exactly what she told me to do because it conflicted with the lax culture of the school. I quickly lost control of my first class and could barely keep myself going. Then the assistant principal entered the room and saw what was going on. He pulled me out and questioned me as though I had no idea what I was teaching. I knew what personification was, or at least I thought I did, but he just made me feel stupid. After that, I did my best to power through the day and was in a meeting to figure out what my next step would be. I decided that everyone was better off without me, and I decided that I would leave in an orderly fashion. That day is what broke me. Story 41. I taught elementary school for 7 years. I definitely had those moments every year. Not one defining I'm out moment, but many small ones that piled up and made it too stressful to picture doing for 30 more years. Even though I enjoyed part of the job and I was good at it, the main reason was that I was ill prepared to support kids with trauma and didn't get any real support while they were in my class. Story 42. For me, it was when a parent came up to me on parent-teacher night and asked me if my parents knew I was teaching. It was so uncomfortable and he just walked away laughing with his buddies. That, combined with kids who cussed me out and posted online about wanting to fade me, a football coach who threatened my coaching job if I didn't pass as star quarterback, and too little pay to put up with all of that made me decide to leave after my first year of teaching. Now I'm in law school and I couldn't be happier. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.